Well, hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So this is going to be the second take of this video. I actually spent 35 minutes talking to myself in this room recording this video with no sound. So this time I'm going to try and get it done quicker. So this is the final 2021 champions ranked video where we're going to be taking a look at top 8 champions in my personal opinion. This is the list thus far, from Saihoman in the worst place to Nimrod in the 9th, which I covered in the previous 2 videos. And after this one, we're going to be taking a look at 2021 buffs ranked videos. Hopefully, we're going to get through all the buffs in 2 videos because, well, let's face it, when Kabam buffs champions quite frequently, the new kits are still significantly shorter than they would be in a new champion, for example. So there isn't going to be that much to discuss. And then we can see kind of like the upcoming videos with my year-end rankings. So that being said, very important disclaimer that this is my opinion. I do not think that my opinion is better or worse than anybody else's. It is simply the one that I hold. This is the way I see the game. If you do see the game in a different way, and if you disagree with me, that does not mean that I want to pick a fight with you. That does not mean that I have insulted your honor of your ancestors and family name. Quite the opposite. That does mean that I encourage discussion and debate, and if you are convinced that I am under or overvaluing some champions, you can politely lay out your arguments, and that is, the courteous, the good thing to do. In 2021, unfortunately, we have adopted the worldview where it's my way or the highway, or if you do not think the way I do, then you're a bad person, or you're wrong, or you don't understand anything. Many of us have forgotten the point of discussions and debates. And I encourage more of us to return to that and enjoy them. How else are you meant to learn and grow if you're not willing to listen to people with different worldviews or points of view? Right. That being said, let's get to it, shall we? We have 8 champions left, and we're going to start with spot number 8. Spot number 8 is going to be Odin himself, the All-Father himself. Now, his addition to the contest was quite scuffed, like with several other champions, but with him more so than others because of his whole pre-fight debacle, where Kabam had to kind of nuke down the stackability of his pre-fights. But as a sort of compensation, he actually got buffed a bit, and that was extremely good thing, because initial version of Odin was actually extremely impractical, and he was a bit of a dud for 2 out of 3 fights in a quest, which just didn't work well. But as a result, what we still don't have what we necessarily expected Odin to be. But we do have effectively a very sturdy, reliable beat stick. A lot of people still do not understand just exactly how tanky this guy is with his block proficiency, with his armor, with, his overall stats, and also how much base attack this guy carries with that Fury. He has one of the, if not the highest attacks in the game at the start of the fight, where you do not need to do anything. You just start with a massive Fury that gives you a huge attack increase, and you just go to pound town with the guy. Right. All in all, his additional bit of utility as a standalone champion comes from his true focus, which he's easily capable of maintaining throughout the entire fight. So that is superbly helpful. And then past that, we can take a look at his pre-fights, his ability to grant pseudo shock immunity to champions, his ability to grant, damage reduction abilities, or aptitude buff increasing damage output of Fury and precision reliant champions. All in all, some of those abilities aren't even all that important. As important is the fact that you're granting actual buffs to a champion, thus significantly increasing the effectiveness of Angela or Red Goblin or Ghost if you're bringing in Trinity, and even more champions. All that piece together, I do personally believe that Odin is one of those champions that might not necessarily be the flagship of your account, but I do believe that he's a champion that as many summoners as possible should have access to. It's fairly straightforward to play. very solid damage, you know, very tanky, and is great in giving you more options. Like when you need a champion that's shock immune and does X, and you know there aren't that many shock immune champions in the game, then you can make pretty much anybody shock immune and you're good to go. It's just one of those things that opens up the game more, and that's why I do value him. He's actually currently one of my most sought after 6-star champions that I have yet to acquire. I do hope I get him at some point soon. But here we are. Odin is in spot number 8, in my opinion, very deservedly. Spot number 7 is going to go to Mr. Negative. Mr. Negative is a fairly interesting champion, and one of the reasons why many people overlooked him initially and still do, and you know, myself included to a degree, is that his damage output is extremely divided. He has relatively pathetic damage on his base. Like his base attacks, his special attack damage, all of that is fairly low, and it's very easy to be unimpressed with his numbers, so to speak. But about, I'd say, 75-80% of his damage probably comes from a single level 2 in a fight, where everything you do up until getting to that level 2 is borderline almost irrelevant compared to how much damage his level 2 can output if you have set your dark energy up correctly. That being said, his damage output obviously is not the reason why he is the champion he is, but it is better than many people think, and I do think it is good enough to make him a solid option for a ton of different things. The reason why it gets interesting with Mr. Negative is the fact that, well, that he's one of the very few champions in the game that's immune to Nullify, Stagger, and Fate Seal, and we see more and more of those nodes creeping up and more of those abilities being implemented in the game. On top of that, you have very effective abilities to counter degeneration in basically any form. In his base, even for every debuff on the opponent, you reduce the degeneration by 40%. So that is already fairly solid, considering Mr. Negative is a science champion that can debuff the opponents fairly effectively. And then on top of that, if you have him awakened, then you actually gain a very significant heal, where if you're not mitigating all of degen damage, then you can more often than not just out heal it and actually end up netting plus health as a result. And then he's one of those champions that has on-demand evade in his kit via his heavy attacks. Now that does take a bit of practice, and there are a few tricks to do it well, but in general, the fact that you can evade on demand and comply with the requirements of many different nodes actually makes him a very solid safe option, for instance, when intercepts are required and so on and so forth, and those nodes are fairly often very tricky ones to deal with, including Alliance War, which is why he is one of the more solid Alliance War options. If you want to check out Mr. Negative in Alliance War, check out MP Blaze channel. He's a teammate of mine and frequents Mr. Negative on his offensive team. So just search for MP Blaze. You will find out plenty of very cool and interesting videos, and you're going to realize exactly how good Mr. Negative is. On top of that, he's the only champion in the game that can get rid of every single buff on him on demand, but at the same time still gain buffs when it need be, because he can gain buffs on demand with dropping heavy attacks. So that creates a very interesting mechanic, whether if you trigger Dex and you're up against the Spite, you can easily get rid of it, or if you need to have a buff active on you, you can do that just by dropping heavy attack, and that just adds to his overall versatility. And then obviously there are more and more interesting elements involved. As a science champion, as most of the science champions are, he's also gifted with petrified debuffs that you can reverse opponents' healing and power gain. You can inflict degeneration, which often can be super helpful. And there is a bit of heal, but you know that heal isn't overall that helpful in his level 3. But all in all, he definitely has extremely versatile kit. And I think as time goes by, more and more people will start to get more familiar with the champion, because there is some learning curve. There is definitely a knowledge requirement in using this champion to become fluent, to know exactly what's going to happen and when. Perhaps the most useful thing that I personally like to use of Mr. Negative is his ability to reduce opponents' power rate by 60% for majority of the fight, to be honest. If you really play around with it, you can always have this active, and in reality that means that you can quite often get to your level 2 before your opponent has had a chance to even use a level 1. So I do love that a lot for Mr. Necto. So here we are. That's why he's in spot number 7. And let's move on to spot number 6. And in spot number 6, I'm placing Scarlet Witch Sigil. Now, I was thinking whether I should include her in the rankings or I should not. However, I decided that I will, because I did not include her in rankings of 2020, because that's when we actually learned her about her kit. But the reason to include her is because she will eventually be available to free-to-play players as well. I know that right now, there is a large group of players who do not spend any money on the game at all, therefore they have had no chance to acquire this champion. However, Kabam has stated that that will change at some point in the future, about 6 months after her release, which should be right about now, to be honest. So at some point in the near future, we can look forward to Scarlet Witch being added as a reward or an option to acquire in either some crystals or arenas or something. So there is that. So all in all, I like her as a character. And obviously, she does have her downsides, which everybody's very quick to point out. You know, you never know when an opponent's going to go unblockable and things like that. In reality, you kind of do know, and you still can nullify that unblockable with your parry. That nullify ability, in fact, is one of the greatest things about the champion, because it is such a handy, on-demand ability to get rid of opponent's buffs and quite frequently copy the opponent's buffs, that it's kind of perfect for a Mystic champion. Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. Now, there are obviously, as I mentioned, downsides in using her, as you can be giving your opponents very potent prowess buffs or unblockable buffs in convenient moments, and it can backfire at times. You have to be very careful playing with her, just like you have to be extremely careful playing against her. In all seriousness, I think she's one of the scariest champions to fight against, especially in like Alliance War, where Mystic Dispersion is a thing, because she continuously keeps giving you buffs that inevitably eventually expire, that fill her Mystic Dispersion. And then on top of that, you never know when she's going to go unblockable, and, you know, it is always a very, very dicey fight. I have fought against her a couple of times, and I can safely say there was not a single moment of the fight where I felt completely in control, even though I was using very kind of control type of champion with Scarlet, Black Widow Clairvoyant. All that being said, I think this is where she lands at the moment. I have her at rank 2. I have her used for multiple parts in 7.3. I think maybe for 7.2 as well, if I remember correctly. Definitely in 7.4 beta. I'll probably take her to rank 3 at some point. I do not necessarily think that she has to be awakened. It's kind of like nice to have. But all in all, I think she's one of those champions where you get her, you rank her, you put on max Mystic Dispersion, and you just start spamming special attacks. Additional point that I absolutely love about the champion is the fact that she has access to all of these damage over time effects, but she does not necessarily rely on being able to land these damage over time effects in order to do her damage, because she can easily switch to dropping a level 3 or continuously drop level 1s and then going for degen damage instead, or even passive degen. She has potential for some massive special attacks and also plenty of power gain with her heavy attacks. So yeah, I really do like and enjoy this champion. I think she's basically the saving grace of the Mystic class in 2021, because if you take a look at the Mystics added in 2021, one of these things is not like the others, because all others suck. Scarlet Witch is good, and then we have basically some of the worst champions of the year there. The Mystic class kind of got shafted a bit this year, thankfully for Scarlet Witch and thankfully for Diablo buff, that kind of like, you know, maintained the advances of Mystic class, so to speak. Alright, spot number 5, and spot number 5 goes to Null. Now I'm going to be speaking with second-hand knowledge. I have very little practical experience using this guy, because I only have like a 4-star version. I haven't even managed to get the 5-star as of right now. I'm sure I will in the future at some point, but I'm largely relying on other people's opinions, on my teammates, and things that I have seen on YouTube. First things first, definitely for the champion, can we say, if you have seen a deep dive on the champion posted by Marvel Concept Champions, that definitely didn't do him justice in terms of numbers, and in reality he does have actually very good damage output, especially in mid to longer tier fights. I think the reason why as many people do love him, or one of the main reasons, is the fact that he's extremely Liquid Courage and double edge friendly. We can see that he takes 60% less bleed and poison damage, which automatically lets him heal a ton when you run Liquid Courage and Double Edge. And now that does not necessarily always immediately make the champion good, but if the champion is at least moderately good and can heal as much as Null can, then there is a good chance a ton of people will like him, enjoy him, and use him just from sustainability point of view. And that is, again, one of the reasons why people like Null so much. Additional 40% degeneration resistance, obviously, is also a welcome change. Doesn't quite cover you always, but is good enough to mitigate the degen damage to a degree. But then all in all, we have some more interesting qualities for Null, and perhaps the one that I personally like the most is that he's one of the very, very few cosmic champions in the game that doesn't really rely on any buffs. Therefore, in the matchups where it would benefit you to bring in a cosmic champion, but there are some sort of nodes that would, prevent you from gaining a ton of buffs or champion abilities, you might be one of the best options by default. And my philosophy playing this game is always to try and cover as many kind of like missing abilities, missing holes, missing answers that I can in my roster, and that makes me want to have Null. The fact that he's Liquid Courage Double Edge friendly, and he's a cosmic champion with good amount of damage that does not rely on buffs at all. On top of that, his ability to reduce opponents' combat power rate by 65% can be super helpful. Now, it is nowhere near as effective as it is on Mr. Negative, for instance, just because Mr. Negative can access it without actually striking the opponent first, pretty much. Therefore, Mr. Negative just can have not necessarily higher uptime on it, but it's there from the start of the fight, which it isn't necessarily true for Null, but still it is a very useful ability that can help you mitigate opponents' special attack, inconveniences. On top of that, obviously, he has access to a ton of debuffs, the Living Abyss debuffs and armor breaks, which result in a ton of damage, which, is what not to like. And he has more healing abilities, stuff like that. I don't think he's necessarily, the most must-have champion, but he's one of those champions that's just very nice and pleasant to have, that's easily sustainable, and will not necessarily be the answer for all your problems, but is certainly going to be one of the champions that you want to look at if you can bring it in the fight. Right, so Null in spot number 5, and again, his placement might change because I still have very little information on him, especially first-hand information, so perhaps placement is going to climb or decline in future. We'll see about that. Now, spot number 4 is going to go to Spiderman 2099, who is arguably the best kind of like from zero to hero champion in 2021, because when he came out, most of the people, myself included, were quite shocked by his damage output, especially his damage output in like deep dives and stuff, which again just shows how you should not rely on the numbers you see in deep dive for a multitude of reasons that I'm not going to get into it. But most of the people, myself included, overlooked some key elements in Spiderman 2099, and most notably the thing that immediately gave him that one special thing where he excels is the 75% damage resistance if opponent is under the effect of True Strike or True Damage. Now, in reality, vast majority of the champions do not have access to True Strike or True Damage, almost like ever. That just doesn't exist in their kits or synergies, or there aren't even that many nodes around that will force you in those fights. However, as it turns out, Alliance War bosses always will have True Strike active, and with that, he immediately became one of the best Alliance War boss killers, which immediately again meant that top-tier players picked up the champion and started bringing him to the Alliance War. Now, because he saw more exposure, more people started experimenting with him, and in the simplest way to explain, since they're going to bring Spider-Man 2099 in for the boss fight, they might as well try and use him for the fights on the way to the boss, and then in some quests. And then more and more good matchups and useful abilities got discovered by this guy, and a lot of the things that people thought will be deal breakers, namely his damage, turned out to be relatively tolerable. On top of that, obviously, he's one of the 2 champions in the game that can never gain a buff, which in itself is a very useful bit of utility when you need to go up against like Spite or EMP modification or so on and so forth. So that just adds to further kind of increase his reach of good matchups. And then we received the anti-venom synergy, which let him start the fight with a wither debuff, which is arguably now the most effective way how to deal with power gain abilities from the very start of the fight, because it's there. You can pause it, you can maintain it for a very long time, and you don't need to do anything to shut down opponent's power gain. And that made him even more powerful, in my opinion, because now he's de facto the best way to deal with power gain effects from the very start of the fight in a lot of different situations. And then obviously heading further, there are, like, you know, more abilities that people are starting to enjoy about the champion. And even though I still do personally believe that his damage is arguably his weaker side, but he's one of those champions that definitely has overcome it. And his, you know, playstyle is fairly finicky, especially with a bit messed up dexterity that we have in the game, because he does rely on you triggering that dex, as in like triggering the dexterity buff, thus pausing your debuffs basically. But still, he's proving himself, and it's very possible that, you know, his popularity is going to raise even further. I already have had to have discussions in my own chat rooms about how there's a group of people that think he's the best science champion in the game de facto. Now, I personally do not think so yet anyways, but the fact itself that I have had those conversations just proves how far this guy has come from his initial point of release. Now, moving on to spot number 3, that's going to be ShangChi. That's an excellent addition to the skill class. I do think that initial reception of ShangChi perhaps overlooked a few downsides of him, but all in all, he doesn't have many, and he's very, very solid option. That's the way I personally feel about ShangChi, that he's extremely just kind of sturdy, solid, easy to use champion that's extremely versatile, which is one of the reasons why I like him so much. Have this guy at rank 3, absolutely love him at rank 3. I think he's one of the best slow champions in the game, and I also love the fact that he has such an easy access to an opening via his chi strikes, being able to stun opponent through the block, land a combo, refresh your chi charges, and then go for a big level 2. Very, very powerful champion. Definitely favorite champion already for a group of players. Love his purify abilities. The only thing that I somewhat dislike with his purify abilities is the fact that you get your cleansing strikes effectively taken away once you reset your chi strikes, which means that there is a downtime where you are unprotected from debuffs. I think that is one of the bigger weaknesses, to be honest, in the champion. And even though the downtime isn't huge, in fights where it really does matter, it can become problematic. But all in all, he does have some of the best debuff, purification, and prevention abilities in the game. On top of that, you can have very high uptime of unblockable, should that turn out to be necessary. And then obviously extremely reliable and easily accessible slow. Guaranteed crits on a special attack 2 is an icing on a cake, and special attack 2 hits relatively hard even if you do not have chi charges. That makes him extremely compatible with skill power boosts, should those be needed. All things put together, the only side note I will give about ShangChi is that his damage output is not as good as many people think. And many people think that his damage is in the top tier kind of thing. And that is quite inaccurate. His damage isn't bad by any means. I'd say it's still above average. But just because there is that very beautiful guaranteed crit, big number, level 2, it doesn't nullify the fact that it takes quite significant amount of time to get there. And when it comes to damage output being strictly, I think it's good. I think it's fine. I don't count it as, you know, a downside of a character at all. But I just want to realistically people understand that his damage output is good, but not insane or amazing just because he has big level 2s. And that goes because it takes quite a bit to ramp up those level 2s. Either way, fantastic champion. Absolutely love ShangChi. And second spot, how KittyPride. KittyPride is a special troublesome character. Now, a lot of people are calling in question whether she's even good for the game. But either way, I think KittyPride is perfectly fine for the game. Only ability that might cause problems in the future that I think might be a bit too much is that defensive combat power rate increased whilst you're being struck if you're phased. Because then, you know, that opens that can of worms of you being able to spam special 3s infinitely under some circumstances, and that just gets silly at a point. All that being combined, to kind of like brutally condense all her kit and what makes her great, it's actually only a couple lines of text. The first important ability is that every time you dash forward, whilst you have 3 or more prowess, you phase. So it's guaranteed, it's not RNG, 100% chance for opponents to miss, and it's going to be almost ever so present in the fight. If you want, you can pretty much phase 90% of the fight time. So that is the first thing. And the second thing is that you take no damage whilst phasing. Those two abilities combined are very simple, but already create countless of extremely interesting applications in the contest. For instance, you can use her as some sort of pseudo Namor Omega Red type of champion where you attack Killmonger or Electro and take no damage. You can time your phases on some sort of other ability detonations just to bypass all the damage, including recoil, which is, you know, almost given with a champion. And then most of her other abilities are, you know, nice, and they work around, you know, her placing incinerates and her being incinerate immune, and then dealing more damage. But that effectively is the heart and soul of the champion, where you phase, you take no damage whilst you phase under basically any circumstances. It is extremely powerful, but obviously it comes with its fair share of practice and caveats. And I think the best and the worst thing simultaneously, the best thing for the health of the game and perhaps the worst thing for the usability of her is that she is quite highly reliant on Tiger Synergy and perhaps Ghost Synergy. Tiger Synergy enables her to go passively unblockable while she has 10 or more prowesses, which is bonkers. Which is bonkers crazy. You can spend pretty much entire fight with every single strike after the initial few being unblockable, and at the point where you can't be hit, you're unblockable, and you're never taking any damage, that's just crazy OP. But again, you do need synergy for that, and you do need to get there. And then with Ghost, you basically just gain more prowesses quicker, which is quite important. Otherwise, sometimes you would have to throw special attacks with hardly any prowess effects active. And this also lets you kind of, well, basically just do more damage. All in all, extremely interesting, complex, and powerful character. I don't think she's overpowered to a point where it would harm the game, but I do think she's crazy powerful, and there will be long-lasting effects of her presence in the contest. So definitely look forward to seeing how crazy she can truly get. And the final champion in spot number 1, the winner, the champion of the year for 2021 will be Hercules, I guess. And with Hercules, another one champion that I initially wasn't necessarily as sold on him as I am right now. And that is because of some things that you just don't really think about. And as a cosmic champion, he obviously looks good. He does tons of damage. He has access to his cruelties and precisions. That immortality is crazy good, especially for Alliance Quest. He's de facto one of the Alliance Quest MVPs at the moment. I use him for Alliance Quest pretty much every day. And there's ton to love about the champion. Obviously, him being basically stun immune, him having fairly quick ramp up, and his damage being divided on, you know, physical damage and then the extra damage that lets him bypass plenty of abilities. There's a lot to like about the champion, how you can effectively bypass miss and auto block for a vast majority of the time in the fights. All that other good stuff. I think the real two reasons perhaps that makes Hercules as good as he is. A is the fact that he does a ton of damage once ramped, no matter what. You don't need to do the whole level 1, level 2 thing, stuff like that. In fact, his base damage is crazy compared to vast majority of the champions in contest. And that automatically lets you use him for a ton more fights you can't use many other champions. He doesn't need to land 5-hit combos. He doesn't need to be able to use a special attack or land the heavy attack or any of that stuff. Once you have ramped him up, you just need to connect to the opponent and you're going to do damage, and a lot of it. And that is extremely effective because huge amount of nodes revolve around hindering use of your special attacks, dictating when how you can use special attacks, or dictating how you can use damage and what you can do in a fight. And Hercules just doesn't really care whichever way, whether you can or can't use special attacks, whether you can or can't throw heavy attacks. He's just going to do damage. Whether you're going to limit his damage with like safeguard and things like that, he has his secondary damage source. He's just one of those champions that gets in a fight and does damage and knocks people's lights out. Combined with his max potential damage on his level 1s and level 2s all active, and that huge long-lasting immortality, that duration you can extend to a quite freakishly long time, is quite crazy good. He is quite crazy good. Now, there are a couple of downsides of Hercules, and the biggest downside of Hercules, truth be told, is the fact that Kabam just can't seem to stop messing with him already, which is one of the most annoying things, but, you know, unfortunately, there's not much we can do about him. The first thing is that initially upon his release, he effectively could tank a level 3. If that is, you know, the way he would have been knocked out, that would trigger his immortality. So that was quite a huge ability that would come in handy in a ton of situations. Because of his immortality, you would be able to survive it, finish the fight, and do that pretty much in every fight. If you need be, just tank a level 3. Can't do that now. Level 3 now basically just means your immortality is not going to activate in the first place, which kind of sucks. And then the second thing that they did is, as they buffed Hawkeye for whatever reason, they nerfed down his Hawkeye synergy, reducing his Infuriate cooldown, which is actually really powerful synergy. Because Infuriate, mechanic that I completely forgot to mention, is actually one of the better things of the champion as well. And the fact that you had significantly reduced cooldown of it was helpful. His Infuriate mechanic is very easy to activate, where effectively you just need to hit opponent with a single or 2-hit combo and dash back, at which point opponents have significantly reduced offensive ability, accuracy, and they become extremely aggressive. Aggressive opponent is an easy opponent to manipulate, easy to intercept, or, you know, easy to predict. And that made Hercules even more versatile. It still does. It still makes him more versatile. Infuriate is a fantastic debuff that I wish more champions would have access to. And yeah, Sly Kabam reduce that synergy. Either way, Hercules definitely enjoying his time in Spotlight. Extremely versatile, useful, high damage output champion. Not necessarily a W GOAT, but definitely one of the AQ top options as of right now. And also extremely useful for majority of the daily content due to his crazy good damage output from pretty much get-go in the fight. Right. So that is my top list of champions, hopefully with sound this time. So now I can move this up. Here we have the full list from 24th to 1st. And keep in mind, this is my opinion. Let me know which champions you think I have misplaced, which champions you would switch around, and how would your list look like. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this series. And tomorrow, we're going to start looking at 2021 champion buffs. That's it for now, and I'm going to catch you guys soon. See ya. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about